Okay, Megan Rogers, as the production designer on Underground, you were tasked with recreating the Antebellum South. What was the biggest challenge that you faced in doing that?
Probably. The biggest challenge was recreating that Antebellum South itself.
Mm-hmm.
And making it feel like we were there and that it was new rather than an antiquated place. You know, we wanted to create a contemporary feel within this historic time, which is actually, there's a lot of parallels to some things that are happening in society and things today. There's a lot of split parties and split people. There's a lot of division in America, even today, that there was then. So
Absolutely.
we wanted it to, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Well, that's okay. We wanted it to feel contemporary, but still transport people back in time.
Right. And, you know, I mean, that's one of the extraordinary things about the show is that this is obviously something that we've seen before, you know, in that portrayal of that era, but there is a freshness to it and a real immediacy to it.
Right.
A lot of that came from the script, I'm guessing.
Oh, definitely. The scripts were amazing. When I first read it, you know, we think about the Underground Railroad. We really haven't seen a lot about that, or about that time, or where people went, or what their journey was. So this is a show that's more about the journey than the place of single oppression. So it's about people moving through this time period. Mm-hmm. So it's very active. We go a lot of different places. We cover a lot of different modes of transportation. And that was actually probably the main challenge. It was constantly changing environments and the vehicles during the time. So we had to do all of the wagons and boats and any kind of transportation in 1850. We still don't have it in good condition today. So we were having to rebuild from scratch or reconceive.
So talk about the research that you did in recreating this period. You looked at books or photographs. What did you look at?
The research for Underground, I started with a lot of books, and I do a lot of reading in addition to looking for visual media, because there's a lot you can read about what people are going through, or some of their stories and journeys, and what their house looked like, or what their yard looked like, or who was working on their yard, or who was doing what in the time, what people's jobs were, really kind of helped facilitate some of the spaces too, which was interesting. So we did tons and tons of research. I had walls of cities, and we had the northern cities and the southern cities and different classes of living, because we covered all of it. We covered the high-end living in the antebellum homes, down to the slave quarters, which were tiny and very elemental, to the people in the north. That kind of contradiction to what, comparing the different spaces and how people lived in society at the time.
Mm-hmm. That was actually something I wanted to ask you about, because one of the great things about the show is that it shows you the differences in the slave quarters versus the plantation, the North versus the South, and this, this different classes of living. Can you talk a bit more about that, specifically to like the characters? Or?
Sure. Well, we start with the Macon family, which was one of our biggest sets. So that's the Macon Plantation, which is in the opening scene, which is one of my favorite shots in the series, where we start with the flying shot through the house, following journey of our house slave. So in the houses, this particular house, we wanted it to feel like it was over the top luxurious. This is almost one of the concepts of women during that time, was they were interested in the world at large, but they didn't ever really get to travel anywhere, because they were, staying at home, having children. That was their job. And so Susanna, the matron of the home, she has made this her Versailles. So it's all overly opulent. She brings in all of these beautiful fabrics, opulent wall coverings, and crystal lamps. They have gas lighting at the time. And it's just all top of the line, over the top richness, and even the food. And then you go out the back door through the cotton fields, and you end up in the slave quarters, which we decided to keep that ultra elemental So they're rough woods. It's weather-ridden. There's not insulation. There's no wallpaper. They've made do with some things. There's some details in some of the slave quarters that I really liked that set decoration provided. They're almost like little handmade toys that the kids would make, and other personal elements that they made to almost emulate the big house. And one of the things we did do of low note is we would kind of weave in some of the same patterns and fabrics from the big house into the slave quarters, except then they were worn and weathered and faded. Mm-hmm. So you had the duality in the two places, but they're living under different conditions entirely.
Mm-hmm. So. Now you shot at a real plantation, right?
We shot the exteriors at a real plantation.
Right. So where'd you find this place? And what did that shooting there and all the history there, what did that add to the work?
Well, it adds a lot of humility to the work. Mm-hmm. Just to see the sheer amount of work we went through, because we started by location scouting all over the state of Louisiana for the perfect plantation home. And in our mind today, we think these houses are going to be huge and really big. They're actually, once you get in them, they're not as big as you think they would be. They all have vaulted ceilings, so they're tall, but they're not huge. It's like a 4-room house, or well, an 8-room house. You've got 4 on the bottom and 4 on the top, and not much more. The staircases in a lot of them, if you were ultra rich like this family was, they had their staircase inside, but a lot of people had their staircases on the outside. So it was actually a show of wealth to have it inside at the time. But most of the places that we found, we were on this particular location. I was looking for some place that could show us both the cotton fields as well as the front of the house and some of the interior of the house. We had a hard time finding all three for a long time. Mm-hmm. And so we found this plantation Felicity, which is it's south of Baton Rouge, just north of New Orleans. And they had just re-leveled the house before we got there. It was not livable. Mm-hmm. So basically the plaster was falling off the walls. It needed a lot of work outside. So we spent about a month and a half, maybe it was 2 months, rebuilding the entire exterior of the house, repainting, making it feel new, adding a cookhouse, because usually they all burnt down from then because they weren't attached to the main house in case something caught fire. And then we added the pond out front and a pass-through to tie our stage sets, because all of our big interior sets for the Meghan Plantation were shot on a stage. Really?
Okay. I wanted to go back to something you talked about earlier about having to build and recreate all this stuff, because it's quite a feat. I mean, there's that great the boat that they end up on. There's all these wagons and things. How big of a team did you need to recreate all this stuff? And
we had a fantastic team. It was never big enough. But we had a very special team of people who were very up for a challenge. And this was a very unique show where every single episode was a new visual architectural challenge for us. Because we had the big house and all the Antebellum South high society places. Mm-hmm. And then we had the elemental slave quarters and all that kind of rough life. And then we also had we had the boats. We also got to create an Indian village. And just all of the woods and everything that we were into, and all of the wagons traversing through all the woods. Yeah. And hidden wagons. Then you add the element of having to create compartments and people hiding in the wagons too. That was fun.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's really the epic nature of it is really kind of indicative of the kind of work that gets done on TV these days, and even in series television. Now, you've worked in a lot of feature films as well. I wonder if you could talk a bit about some of the practical differences between the two, or if there is much difference nowadays.
Between features and a series?
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I think for me, the biggest difference was the arc of the story. Mm-hmm. A series arc, it's 10 hours. So we had a 10-hour arc of a journey. And when we started the journey, we didn't know that 10th hour.
Mm-hmm.
So we start knowing the first 4 hours, and then you kind of get caught up on the rest. So my biggest difference was not being able to design for a full arc emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to find a new way, since this was my first television series, I did have to find a new way to find that emotional arc, which was we found that in the journey and the struggle, and we just stuck with that because that's going to stay. That's never going to go away.
Mm-hmm.
So, and how it resolves in different ways, and how we can also show that duality of struggle visually at times. Like there's the I think it's in episode 6 where we get to see the Hawks house in the north.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an opening sequence showing the slaves below the house and getting up through the fireplace and going through. We built that set on a stage to show the 2 layers so that we could have a particular angle going through the house, cutting through the house, showing from the bowels of the house, and then cutting up to show people standing on top of it, which kind of in a visual sense, it symbolically shows, people standing on top of other people.
Mm-hmm.
In this state, it's also the path to freedom. They have to endure the oppression to break free.
Right, absolutely. So you just got renewed for a 2nd season, which congratulations. What can we expect from season 2? You don't have to spoil anything for me, but what can we look forward to?
Well, you can definitely look for more amazing stories.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure Joe and Misha have a lot in store for us. And, well, I know you're going to have a lot of great sets.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to the challenge that's coming up again of all of the fun big sets we're going to get to do and how we're going to explore that time period even more. Because there's more that happens in that time that we haven't even touched upon. That's going to be interesting to show visually.
Yeah, absolutely. Lastly, I wanted to ask you, so you received an Emmy nomination a few years ago for your work on Temple Grandin. What did that recognition mean to you?
Well, I received that Emmy nomination with the production designer Richard Hoover for our work on Temple Grandin. To me, that was a really hard show, and it was a really it was just a hard show that was challenging for us to get everything done, and some of the outdoor work and stuff was hard. So it was kind of like we were constantly within the elements on it.
Mm-hmm.
So it was nice it was a surprise. I had a friend of my mother's called me. It's like, oh, you got an Emmy nomination. I didn't even know. So it was nice to have the recognition for the hard work
mm-hmm.
that went into such a visual show. Mick Jackson did such a great job pulling all of the elements and showing what autism was like visually
mm-hmm.
on that. He and Richard Hoover working together were just brilliant.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, and congratulations on your work. It's a really fantastic show, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too. Thanks.